What's up, everybody? So it's not a funny video today. Funny videos will resume shortly. So some of you may have seen some recent drama concerning North Korea, of all things, and a travel vlogger called Fun for Louis, my good friend Louis Cole, who I love and respect a lot. Basically, for those of you who don't know, Louis made a series of travel vlogs of when he went to North Korea, and he showed more like a positive spin on North Korea, such as like water parks and going surfing and things like that. And he's been criticized, whether you believe rightly or not, for not mentioning human rights atrocities and all of the bad things that are going on in North Korea, because it's bad. It's bad. I've spoken to Louis privately about my personal issues with these videos and what I would have done differently, but I thought instead of maybe adding to this sort of drama narrative that keeps going on with YouTubers who disagree with each other, I thought maybe we could just talk about North Korea. Also, you have to excuse me, I just came back from summer in the city and my voice is still completely damaged. This is not a good time to do this video, but I feel like it's important and it's an important topic to me, so we're gonna do it. Some of you may or may not know that North Korea is my one passion project, actually. Some of you may remember last year we raised $25,000 for Liberty in North Korea, which is a charity that helps the refugees and people who have defected from North Korea. And over the last 2 years of my life, I have studied North Korea. I have read a butt ton of books. I have seen every documentary you could possibly throw at me. I've considered going to university to study more about North Korea. I'm fascinated by the country, and I thought if I'm gonna make future videos about North Korea, then it would be a good idea to give you guys a very, very brief, basic history of North Korea. So without any further ado, this is a very basic, very brief, very summarized history of North Korea. So let's start off in 1910, before there was even a North and South Korea. The country was simply called Korea and it was occupied by Japan. I'm not going to pretend to know too much about this period in Korea's history, but from what I have read, and I have read a fair bit, Japanese weren't too kind to the Koreans during this occupation. Despite their commerce rapidly expanding and the sudden exposure to cultural things such as television or radio, the Koreans were essentially used to strengthen Japan's economy through production and the military. Until 1919, Korea was under military rule, restricting the freedom of Koreans and oppressing any open thoughts of dissent. That sounds familiar. However, after a nationwide protest in 1919, Japan somewhat relaxed their rule over Koreans, allowing them to speak more freely. That is until 20 years later in 1939. I think we all know what happened in 1939. During the Second World War, many Koreans were forced to take Japanese names, as well as work overseas in Japanese factories and fight against the Allies with the Japanese soldiers. And many Korean women found themselves drafted as comfort women to the soldiers. Sex slaves. Basically, not a good time to be Korean. Before the end of the Second World War in August of 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan, eventually defeating Japan's Kwangtung army. I apologize for my pronunciation. I'm not Japanese, believe it or not. This defeat of the Kwangtung army essentially sped up the surrender of Japan when the Allies bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As a result of losing the war, Japan surrendered its occupation of Korea. And after a very long period of angry negotiations, Korea was split between the Soviet Union and the United States along the 38th parallel, which is a circle of latitude around the Earth 38 degrees north of the equator. This left 16 million Koreans in the south and 9 million Koreans in the north. In 1948, 3 years after the end of World War II, after failing to reach unification, the two states were officially split into the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, or North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union, and South Korea, which was supported by the United States. The US appointed a man called Syngman Rhee as head of the Provisional Government of the South, and the Soviet Union designated the role of Premier of North Korea to a man called Kim Il-sung. Hey ho, let's go. Kim Il-sung's origin story is one that's met with a lot of mystery and a lot of controversy. What is known is that back in 1926, Kim, who was still going under his birth name of Kim Song-ju, founded the Down with Imperialism Union, which was an anti-Japanese organization created to fight against Japanese occupation of Korea. In 1931, Kim joined the Communist Party of China along with many anti-Japanese guerrilla groups, including the Northeast Anti-Japanese United Army. In 1935, Kim took on the name Kim Il-sung, which means Kim become the sun, and was put in charge of a division of hundreds of men in 1937 at the young age of 24. He later went on to become a major in the Soviet Red Army, where he served until the end of World War II. This is how he became known to the Soviet Union and was eventually given power over what would become North Korea. We good so far? Hold on in there. During his 46-year rule over North Korea, Kim Il-sung established a cult of personality, erecting statues of himself across the country and brainwashing his citizens to essentially treat him as a godlike figure. Those who opposed him were either sentenced to death by execution or sent to prison camps, with both methods of punishment still reportedly being used in the country today. I say reportedly because North Korea has consistently denied the existence of these prison camps, and I'm not about to get shot. And now we move on to the Korean War, which I'm not going to go into with massive detail because we will be here for hours. In 1950, Kim Il-sung, along with the Soviet ambassador to North Korea, Terentij Shtaikov, successfully convinced Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, heard of him, that South Korea were planning to invade the North, and that invading South Korea first would be welcomed by the people of the South. And somehow that worked. Basically, at this point, the Soviet Union was still basically in charge of North Korea. Any kind of war decisions had to go through the Soviet Union. So it was very important that Kim Il-sung convinced Joseph Stalin that we must go to war, and he did. Stalin! By spring of 1950, all American troops had been withdrawn from Korea, and the US hadn't really shown any willingness to stop communism in China. And so on the 25th of June 1950, with the support of the Soviet Union and China, the Korean People's Army, the Army of the North, crossed over the 38th parallel into the South with the intent of arresting and executing Syngman Rhee, the head of South Korea. In early July, US forces arrived to defend the South, and over the next 3 years, a lot of back and forth, horrible fighting occurred. And the figures for the death toll vary a lot, but anywhere between 2.5 and 5 million people died in the Korean War. I don't have a joke to end this bit, because that's horrible. By 1951, it had already become quite clear that both sides were at a stalemate, and despite the ongoing death of the troops from either side, neither side was making any progress. Negotiations for an armistice began, and on the 27th of July 1953, an armistice agreement was finally signed by both states. However, an armistice is merely an agreement to stop fighting for a while, kind of like, you know, when your kid brother kicks you, so you bite him, and then your mum makes you both sit on the stairs and say sorry, or you don't get ice cream for dessert. Technically, the two sides are still at war today, although earlier this year, North Korea reportedly approached the US about ending the war formally, the talks of which were scrapped because North Korea decided to conduct a nuclear test. Good one. By the time the armistice was finally signed, the border between North and South was basically back at the 38th parallel, which is quite weird. And the two states are now divided by the truce line by a heavily guarded, heavily armed, demilitarized zone, otherwise known as the DMZ. No civilian is allowed to cross the DMZ, which is 160 miles long across the entire Korean peninsula and 2.5 miles wide, and also filled with landmines, and is heavily guarded by soldiers on both sides, and has state propaganda from both countries blaring from loudspeakers about the enemy. So it must be quite noisy, really. Over the course of the next 30 years, the North attempted and failed several assassination attempts of members of the South Korean government. But surprisingly, due to a massive focus on industrial production, the North Korean economy started to recover quite quickly from the war. And until the 1960s, the growth was higher there than in the South. In 1956, leader Kim Il-sung developed Juche, which is still the official political ideology of North Korea to this day. Essentially translating to self-reliance, Juche encourages the state as a whole and each individual citizen to be the masters of their own destiny and not relying on other states politically or monetarily. However, as China began to improve its relations with the United States in the 1970s, Kim Il-sung chose to cut many ties with the country, encouraging its citizens to produce everything themselves, from food to technology. By then, there's a helicopter, and I'm scared it's North Korea. By the 1980s, the North Korean economy began to falter, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the Soviet Union really being the only country still financially supporting them, North Korea entered the dark period known as the Arduous March. This bit is not funny, and it's really really sad. In 1994, after a heart attack, Kim Il-sung passed away. His son Kim Jong-il had begun taking over duties as early as 1992, but after Kim Il-sung's death, he was made their new leader and quickly implemented a policy called Songun, or military first. The policy ensured a massive chunk of the economy and the country's resources being allocated to the military. With less money being allocated to farmers, along with flooding in the mid-90s that devastated crops and infrastructure, North Korea entered a period of extreme widespread famine, which reportedly led to up to 3 million deaths across the country. Read more into this if you accidentally woke up happy and quickly need to feel bummed out. Children were abandoned in the streets, there were reports of cannibalism, and even cases of pellagra, which is a condition caused by eating maize, and only goddamn maize. In an attempt to save money and reduce starvation, the government created a propaganda campaign called the Arduous March. The words starvation and famine were not used because they would imply that the government had failed. Despite their policy of self-reliance, North Korea began to accept food and aid from the United Nations under the agreement that they would disarm themselves of more and more weapons. During this time, South Korea also began to aid the North under their Sunshine policy, which was basically a policy where the South would be nice to the North, which is nice. That policy is officially no longer in effect as of 2010 after North Korea conducted nuclear tests. For God's sake. To this day, despite improvements, foreign aid is still sent on and off to North Korea, and the threat of another famine is constantly looming over the country. And now we move on to their current leader, the one we all like to make jokes out of when really he has killed a lot of people. Him. Yeah. On the 17th of December 2011, Kim Jong-il passed away from a reported heart attack, and he was succeeded by his son, Kim Jong-un. At just 32 years old, Kim Jong-un is the world's youngest state leader and was chosen to lead by his father because his other siblings were not deemed suitable for the role. By which I mean one of his brothers, Kim Jong-nam, tried to enter Japan illegally under a fake passport so he could visit Disneyland in Tokyo. That would cost you the leadership, wouldn't it? Educated in Switzerland, Kim Jong-un is the first of the 3 leaders to have been born after the state was founded, and he appears to have a somewhat softer approach to free markets and international trade than his father and grandfather did. However, since assuming power in 2011, many members of his father's previous government have reportedly been purged and or executed. And whilst the fed to wild dogs rumour about Jang Sung-taek proved to be rubbish, one of his supporters was confirmed by state media to have been executed by a flamethrower. So, despite the more relaxed attitude towards economic trade and capitalism, including shopping malls, fancy restaurants and cutesy theme parks in the capital of Pyongyang, areas outside of the capital are still largely unreported on, as no tourism groups or press outlets are allowed to visit anywhere outside of a very strictly guided tour route. If you visit North Korea, you are never left alone except for in your hotel room. You are told what you can and what you can't document, and you never know whether what you're seeing is real or if it's been set up by the North Korean government's propaganda machine, such as the children's hospital in the capital, which strangely doesn't seem to have any sick patients. That's weird. It's pretty much widely known at this point that life in Pyongyang is very different to life in cities outside of the capital. The alleged prison camps are reportedly still in existence, despite the ongoing denial from the state that they're real. I'm just gonna put some random pictures in here for no reason. And despite talks of eventual denuclearization looking up during the last few years of Kim Jong-il's life, Kim Jong-un has officiated 2 nuclear tests since becoming leader, one in 2013 and one earlier this year in 2016. The border between North Korea and China, the Yalu and Tumen rivers, have both seen their security dramatically tightened, making it much harder for citizens of North Korea to defect than it was under the leadership of Kim Jong-il. Additionally, if any citizen does manage to escape the country, known as defecting, and are found in China, the country's repatriation policy ensures that if they're caught, they are sent straight back home, where I assume they are not greeted with flowers and a basket of puppies. The tensions between North Korea and China have increased lately due to nuclear tests as well as other things. Reports of public executions for speaking out against the state are common. You can be in prison for something as simple as folding a newspaper with the leader's face on it, because as with the 2 previous leaders, Kim Jong-un is being treated as a godlike figure. It is a true dictatorship, and as North Koreans are not able to leave their country freely, many North Koreans still believe that their country is the strongest, kindest, and richest country in the world, although that is slowly changing due to the illegal smuggling of South Korean dramas on DVDs. People may finally be awakening to the fact that North Korea is not the perfect state, but speaking out about it is still too risky, as you never know who will report you for treason and whether you'll be executed for it. And that brings us up to today. I hope you found this brief introduction helpful. I encourage you to do your own research into the Korean War, the arduous march, and the state of the country right now, because the history of it and just the state of it is weirdly, darkly fascinating, at least to me. I'm planning on covering more topics to do with North Korea on my new talk channel, which will be announced soon. But I hope that this video has given you enough information to make you want to go and research the country and look into the amazing charity work of both Liberty in North Korea and Amnesty International. Liberty in North Korea work to save North Koreans who have defected into China from being sent back to what could basically be their death, and also give these defectors a platform on which to speak about the current state of North Korea, which we know very little about. So far this year, over 70 refugees have been rescued and 530 have been rescued since 2010, which is amazing work. And Amnesty International are constantly working to put pressure on North Korea to close their prison camps, where up to a reported 130,000 people are being imprisoned and tortured. I think it's safe to say that the majority of North Koreans do not go surfing and do not get to go to water parks and do not get to enjoy the theme parks or the fancy restaurants or the shopping malls and live in poverty and fear. And there isn't a light side to that. So thank you so much for watching and listening to me on such a long video. As you can tell, this is something that I like to think I'm somewhat educated about. I'm still learning every day. There's always new things going on. There's always things that I'm trying to learn. If I got anything wrong, let me know in the comments and I'll try my hardest to correct it all. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and funny videos will be back in a few days. So until then, catch you later.